Greetings, everyone. This is Mike Riley, the voice of Ironman. And this is the Old School Tri Show with my Kiwi mates Cameron Harper and Brian Ashby. The show that talks about all things triathlon, old and new. We're powered by Ansco Foods, bringing you nutrition and good health from New Zealand's beef and lamb. Thanks for listening, everyone. Enjoy the show.
Welcome along to the Old School Tri Show, brought to you by our great friends at Ansco Foods. And today, Brian, gee whiz, the repeat winners of Ironman New Zealand just keep coming.
In the early days in the women's race, there were two names that dominated. One of them, of course, was Kiwi Erin Baker, who we've spoken to in an earlier episode. This one packed a 1-2 punch with her then hubby and still friend, Ken Glar. Her name, from Australia, Jan Wanklyn.
Ansco Foods is proud to be the new naming partner of Ironman New Zealand, ensuring every stroke, pedal and stride is powered by the best nature has to offer. Ansco Foods is on a mission to bring nutrition and good health from New Zealand's finest beef and lamb. Ansco Foods, putting the iron in Ironman with New Zealand's finest beef and lamb. Visit anscofoods.com/Ironman to find out more.
Well, what an absolute treat for us on the Old School Tri Show to talk to one of the early winners of Ironman New Zealand, not just once, not twice, 3 times, from Australia, Jan Wanklyn. Jan, fantastic to have you on board. How's things?
Good. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's good, just to connect with people that have been in the world that I was in. So, yeah.
Yeah. And the world that you were in, gosh, you I guess in the early days on the women's side of Ironman New Zealand, we had, in the first decade or so, we had 2 names that featured prominently on the top of the podium. Erin Baker was one of them. You were the other. It wasn't like that on the men's. It was a different winner every year. But before we sort of get to Ironman New Zealand, we'll wind the clock back a little bit further. I just wonder because these are the early days of the sport. So what was your sort of background? And I know you sort of started competing sort of around about 1984. How did you sort of, your sporting interests, your early sporting loves and so on, how did you fall into the sport of triathlon?
Well, I think that's a very apt description. I just fell into it. So I was teaching at the time. I got posted out in a place called Blackwater, which is a mining town in East Jabib, Queensland. And I was just so incredibly bored. So I'd done a bit of master swimming leading into that. So I actually started running when I was out there because I'd never really done much running before. And then I bought myself my first little, trusty treadly, started biking to and from school. And when I went back to the Gold Coast, I had a couple of people say to me, you should try this sport of triathlon. I'm like, well, what's that? So I started, doing a couple of races just on the Gold Coast and realized that my biking skills were very poor. I think I drove the guys nuts at the bike shop. Just every week I'd go in there and say, how do I get better at this? How can I get better? What do I need to do to improve? Time on the bike. But that was sort of my start into it. And my skills were terrible. I think the first race I did, somebody went by me and said, pick a bigger gear, pick a harder gear. Like, what do you mean? So yes, I was a real rookie. But it just really, really interested me. And that was sort of the beginning of it. And couldn't do without it. Got addicted.
It's quite funny you talk about sort of teaching, out in a wee country town out the back and beyond. It's not dissimilar to what Erin Baker sort of dealt with, how she kind of rolled into the sport as well.
Yeah, you just get, what can I do? I am so bored. And I used to run out on the main road because there was nowhere else to run, like the main road in and out of Blackwater. That was where I ran every morning.
And what?
So for you, Jan, did you, can you remember, like, for your first couple of races, you said your cycling was quite poor and people trying to give you advice, shall we call it, on the way through on that. What made you
persist? What made you think, you know what, I can get better at that? I mean, are you a naturally competitive person? I mean, how did that work?
Well, I came from a swimming background, and like I said, I got into master swimming, and then after a while, I just found that to be a little bit too much like training in the old days when you were swimming. So I just was looking for something else. I think that's why I started running. I just wanted something else to do. So it just came along at the perfect time. It really did. I was bored
And,
again.
and yeah, well, I mean, but you were a very, very good runner, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on, and the way your career evolved. Did you realise sort of early on that this was something that you were pretty sharp on the feet?
No, because I can tell you when I first started running, I had so many injuries. And the reason I had so many injuries is back in those days, there was no such thing as a triathlon coach. So I just took my swimming knowledge and applied it to running. And when you swim, you swim hard every session. So I was just basically going out and running too hard every session. I can't tell you how many injuries I had in the early days, but I guess I learned from them. Um, but I took very easily to running, much, much better than I did to cycling. Cycling just was a chore for me, even, you know, even when I was, sort of at the height of my career, it was something that, here we go again on a 6 or a 7 hour bike ride. How am I going to get through it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the
So,
passion wasn't there for that, but it was more the swim
no, I
run.
really loved running. I really,
Yeah.
it's of all the sports, it's a thing that I just enjoyed so much. It's just so fun to be out there. And I always said I wanted to be able to run, 20 miles when I was 80, but I don't think that's going to happen somehow.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Jan, what was your first triathlon? What was the first race you ever did?
Well, there were a couple little ones on the Gold Coast. But the first one I remember doing was Currumbin Valley Triathlon. It was like maybe a 1K swim, 30K bike ride, 8K run, something along those lines. I don't think anything was very proportional back then. Like most of what we would call Olympic distance now, they were usually a 2K swim, which favoured the swimmers a little bit more than it did the cyclists and runners. So all the distances back then were totally different. But that race, I can remember being probably the only female in the race. So it was kind of weird.
Yeah, and you did that, and then more races and more races and so on. So, what sort of kept you going? Did you sort of think, yeah, well, this was fun? Were you looking for more races, or did you think this is my sport? Swim, bike, run is my sport, or how did it evolve over the next sort of
Well,
12,
I
18 months?
I think like I really can't remember the transition. I really don't remember it. But I just think the longer I was in the sport, the more there were races to go to. And then there were series that you could do. And then there was Noosa Triathlon, Mooloolaba. There was Richard, is it Richard Curzon? He used to have a series that he ran sort of in Queensland. Then Barry Voverden came along and he started doing, I think
Yeah,
that was one of his races up at Hinds Dam. That was the first time I met Erin. And that was sort of, definitely one of her coming out parties. She just dominated so much. And it was a great course for her because it was so hilly on the bike. It was all through the hinterland of the Gold Coast. She just
yeah,
thrived.
yeah.
And I think I feel like that was probably one of the first really high profile races that I did. We had people come from interstate. There were quite a lot of, top Queenslanders that did it too. I think it was pre-Liz Heppel days, if you remember that name. But yeah, it was just such a great race. And I think that it was only held once, maybe twice, because then they wouldn't let us swim in the Hinds Dam anymore. So,
And yeah,
and then I remember doing Noosa, and look, I couldn't even tell you what the course at Noosa was when I did it, but I do remember a lot of those races. We just leaned our bike up against a tree somewhere, and that was transition. And
That's awesome.
anybody could go into transition, like anybody. The
yeah,
local, ice cream shop owner could go into transition. It was not cordoned off or anything. Yeah, and you just found your bike leaning up against a tree. People took buckets of water in with them to dunk their feet into. So funny looking back on it now.
Well, I was going to say, as you reminisce, Jan, it must be pretty cool thinking back to those days, thinking, man, and I mean this with respect, but people were learning on the fly really about how to make this sport work, weren't they?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was just so new, and the equipment that we had was so basic. The bikes were basic, the helmets. When I first started doing triathlons, we most of the time didn't even wear a helmet when we rode. It wasn't until they became mandatory that you wore them, and all you could think about when they did become mandatory was, God, my neck hurts. It's so heavy on my head.
Mm, mm.
So, yeah, it's just. I don't think about it too much, but the one thing I will say is I wouldn't change anything for the world. Like, it was just such a great life and lifestyle,
yeah,
and what we got to do and got to see. I mean, we didn't make much money out of it, but it was just such a great existence. It really was. And you never really appreciate anything while you're in it. You don't appreciate it until you look back on it. And if I was to
yeah,
give advice to anybody that's doing a sport that they love, I'd say appreciate what you're doing right now, because you're not going to be able to do it forever this way.
yeah. You all competed over every distance back then. That was sort of the way it was. Whatever, if there was a race, you just did it, and distance sort of, Did you have preferences? Did you realise then that you had abilities with the endurance distances, the longer races?
I think I knew I was an endurance, more endurance than I was speed. I look, I don't know that I ever really went to a track to do any running because I didn't have a running background. So when I first went over to the States, that was something that we did. And then I was a little more competitive in the shorter races because I could actually run, a 36 or a 35 minute 10K at the end of the race. But prior to that, I mean, I had no speed at all. I did run a couple marathons on the Gold Coast. So I just think I was more, when I was swimming, I was a 1500 meter swimmer or an 800 meter swimmer. So I just think I had that endurance, and my body
Yeah.
grew around that endurance as well. And I like the longer distances. I mightn't be very fast, but I can go all day.
Yeah. Yeah.
At what point, Jan, did you realise that you're actually quite good at triathlon?
Well, I won a few of the races here, the Mooloolabars and Noosa. And then I think I did my first Ironman down in Foster the same year. Again, Erin's coming out party in Ironman, the inaugural event, and I absolutely loved training for it. I had a guy friend up in Brisbane who we would connect and do a lot of training together. Sadly, he didn't get through the race because he was one of those people that were hauled out of the swim because of the coldness that first year.
Yeah.
But I was hooked. After I did that Ironman, I was just absolutely hooked. I think that was when I realized this is what I would like to, pursue a little further. And then I think they didn't have it. Maybe they didn't have it the next year, but the year after that I went back, and that was the first year that you had to qualify to go to Kona. So I got a slot for Kona, and that was it.
Well,
I was in.
yeah.
Hook, line, and sinker.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So what was your first things are going well for you domestically. When was the first time you raced offshore? When you went overseas and did
So
a race?
Ken and I met at a race in La Reunion. It was kind of a very loosely put together Australian team, English team, American team, French team, that all did this race in La Reunion. Did anybody else talk about the race in La Reunion?
No.
No. I know Erin went. So Ken and I met there and basically got on really well. And I had school holidays over the December, and I just said, well, I might come over and visit. So I went and visited, and then the next year I took a year off without pay to just, from teaching, just to see what the pro circuit was like over there, because there was just no way of doing that in Australia at that point.
Yeah.
There wasn't even the short course criterium races back then. So, you had one Ironman race in Australia, New Zealand, and then the short races that, you maybe won $300 or $400 at. So it was not a viable thing. So I went over. My first race was in Utah at altitude, the ultimate flatlander, doing a race at altitude.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, what have I done? I can't do this. I can't compete with these people. They're just so much better than me. So it was a real eye-opener to see what the level of talent was in the US. And Erin and Scott were both at that one. Ken met me there. And then from there, just worked on getting fitter and faster, when I went over to Pennsylvania, and then just decided, we weren't going to go back. I wasn't going to go back to Australia. So that was 87, I think, 86, 87. So yeah, that was the beginning of it. Wasn't pretty.
But suddenly you're doing a bit more at altitude and stuff, and your body's adjusting to all of that and so on.
Well,
over time.
where we were wasn't at altitude. I mean,
Right.
I don't think I would ever be good at racing at altitude. I just think I don't have any kind of history of it. And, kind of research sort of says, if you live at altitude, you train at altitude, you'll do well. If you're not from altitude, you either arrive and race within 3 days of being at altitude, or you go there and you acclimate for about 3 weeks, and maybe you'll be okay. So, yes, I definitely avoided doing anything altitude after that. I learned my lesson.
Yeah. You went to so I mean, but things, you've downplayed it a wee bit here, because along the way, you've got a Kona qualifier in '88. You went to Kona for the first time. Tell us a wee bit about that.
I just felt totally intimidated the first time I went to Kona. Everybody's sitting on the pier, shooting the breeze, talking about what they do, and all the fit bodies running around. And I'd actually had an accident probably 3 weeks before I went over there. I did an endo off my bike, hit a bump on a downhill. So I was nursing some stitches and things like that. So I just wasn't really very sure how it was all going to go. But we trained hard for it. And there was a tradition on the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast Marathon used to be in June. So you had to get up at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and go for a 3 or 4 hour bike ride before you turned up to do the marathon. So that's what we did. That was kind of like your initiation for going to Kona.
Oh, well, yeah.
And it was, it's our winter, so for us it was cold being out there doing the ride. So yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds funny for sort of plotters like me, or Cameron's better than I am, the real plotters, talking about you did top 10 in Kona that first time you went there. But you felt intimidated by everything that you were seeing around you in that environment.
Actually, I think the first time I went might have been 87.
Okay, 87. Yeah.
and I raced as an age grouper.
Right.
And I think I finished like top 5 in the age group. So that was my first.
Group.
But yes, I was definitely intimidated. There is no
Right.
doubt about it. That was
So-
really my first international triathlon, was Kona.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I hadn't, at that point, I hadn't really connected with Ken. And then after that was when we went to La Reunion. So yeah.
Yeah.
And then I went to the
So,
States
but
and
you exploded because a year later you come back and you're racing as a pro and you're top 10 at Kona. So that thing's really happened for you.
well, I think like up until then I was working as well. And
Yeah.
so and I say this to a lot of people. They're like, oh, I'd really like to do an Ironman. I'm like, you got to make sure you've got all your ducks lined up. Like, is your family on board with you doing this? Because if they're not, it's not going to work. It's such a huge time commitment. And I really do believe that, I'm not talking about pros here, I'm talking about age groups. I think age group athletes train more hours and try to train like pros than the pros train. And they make it really hard for themselves. And a lot of people that decide to do an Ironman who have not done a lot of racing, they'll do an Ironman and then they're done because they've just drilled themselves into the ground. And, they're probably lucky if they still have a partner at the end of it. So,
And you're right, Jan, because you get these guys and you see them a lot, and unfortunately they want to give it their best go. They get the family on board. The family don't actually really understand their commitment, and they don't get, you've got to hold down a job. You're trying to, maybe you got kids, you got to try and take them to sport or their activities or whatever they're doing. You're trying to have a relationship with your husband or your wife or whoever it is, and you haven't got that recovery time that pro athletes can have, that recovery time and that downtime and that other, you're trying to fit your work in there. It's hard. It's really hard.
That's what really makes a difference. I don't know that a lot of times, I might be wrong now, but I think back then I think the beauty is in the recovery time, in the sleep, and the fact that you don't have to go and sit at work or stand at work, or, once you're done training, for the morning, then you've got the rest of the day until you head out again on whatever the next training session is. But, so many of the age groupers do doubles, and I honestly don't know how they do it.
No.
No. Yeah. So you're what at what point, I guess somewhere in that intervening 12 months, you made a decision, I'm going to race as a pro. Was that a hard step to take mentally to go that way?
I'm just trying to think. I'm not really very good with history. I think in 88, I think we went to Nice that year for the first time. And I think I might have done really well in Nice. And that was kind of the realization that I wasn't an imposter. I could actually do this. But we did a few shorter races. We did a lot of, going to the track and doing all comers meets, and just the amount of time I spent on the bike because Ken, that was his favorite thing to do, was to go biking. Yeah. So he taught me how to bike and I taught him how to swim. How to swim so he could come out with the best.
So making that commitment, and like you said earlier, Jan, you decided, what, I'm moving to Pennsylvania, I'm moving to America, and that commitment of just being, dare I say it, buried in the sport and just living and breathing it made a heck of a difference over that period.
Absolutely. And I can still remember having the conversation with my mother. Mum, I think I'm going to the States and I'm going to try racing professionally in the States. And she said, are you sure that's a good thing to do? I'll never forget her words. And all I can think now is, or for many years, is if I had been a guy and said that to their parents, they would have been like, go for it. Good on you. Have fun. But are you sure that's the right thing to do? Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's really funny on the Old School Tri Show. We spoke with a wee while ago with Laura Siddle, and Cameron, it was kind of a similar scenario, really, wasn't it, with her dad? Yeah.
So was her dad, yeah. She
Yeah.
said to her, because Laura gave up her career as an engineer.
Engineering,
She qualified
yeah.
as an engineer, didn't she? And
Mm.
she said to her dad, "I'm going to go off and be a triathlete and do this profession." And he's like, "Really?
Yeah.
Are you sure?"
I think he's still saying it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's still who could say?
Yeah.
It's amazing how like yourself, Laura's. There's so many people like that they've definitely shown that it was worth the punt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's like, I was in my, I guess, mid to late 20s, and you don't need the financial support of your parents, but you'd like to think that you have the moral support of your
Yeah.
parents when you do something like that. So, but as she came around, she still would say to me, because we go over to New Zealand and train, she'd still say to me, "Do you think this is good for you?" When you walk in after a 9 or a 10-hour training day, like,
Yeah.
it's what we do.
Yeah.
Because just on that, your mum was living in Taranaki, in Taranaki over in that way.
And the reason she was there was because my sister moved over there very early on in her marriage, and they lived in Taranaki. So when my sister decided she was going to have a family, my parents moved over there, my mum and stepdad. So we always had that great connection where we went to Taranaki that we could train. And let me tell you, it's some of the hardest training we have ever done. Like the wind there around that mountain, it's just
and you
brutal.
turn up and you turn up to you got Blair Cox as your tour guide and
Yes.
as some team, and man, they'd tear your legs off that lot, don't they?
Yeah, he was great to have around, Blair. A couple of times in Taranaki when we were training there, it's the only time we've ever done this. We had to be picked up. The weather was so bad on a bike ride. And one day my sister came and picked us up, and we were 3/4 of the way around the mountain, but the weather just went to crap. It was just pouring rain. And then the other time, I think it was just so windy, going along the waterfront out towards Awakra. We ended up riding back into town and stopping at Blair's and saying, "Can you give us a ride home? We're not going around the mountain today."
Well, the beast from the east didn't tell us that story.
Oh, didn't he? And they're that's the only two times we ever had to be rescued on bike rides, both in Taranaki.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, look, that sort of, I guess it sort of leads into your Ironman New Zealand debut in 1990. So I guess you were out here training. Yeah, of course, you had a wedding to attend first.
Oh, yes. We went down to Christchurch and went to Erin and Scott's wedding. So it was fun. Really good fun.
Yeah.
And Christchurch is a tough place to train too. Like, very hot and dry, whereas I think because it's East Coast, Taranaki tended to be a lot more windy and more humid, and it was just tough. And I know the Port Hills of Christchurch are tough too. We went up there training one day and ended up like nearly freezing because the weather just changed and it started storming. And my arms were so sore by the time I got to the bottom of the hill from braking. So, yes, that's not a pleasant memory.
Yeah, and you're probably training with Erin too, I imagine. So she would have just
Actually,
been.
I don't know that I think we did a bit of running together, but they were kind of getting ready for the wedding, I think, at that point, because we were only down there for a few days. I remember we went running with Scott a couple times, but yeah.
Yeah. So your mum's in the Naki. You've got a wedding to come to. Why not do Ironman New Zealand? Was was it always on the horizon for you? So it's something that you wanted to do, Ironman New Zealand, or was it
Well,
just circumstance?
I'm thinking that Ken and I did Ironman New Zealand for the first time in 1989. So we were down there the year before that to do, and I had to talk Ken into doing Ironman New Zealand
Oh, okay.
because
Yeah.
he'd never done any other Ironman races except Kona.
Right. Right.
That was the
Yeah.
only one he'd ever done, and he was kind of, I'm not sure that I want to go down to New Zealand. It's not the right time of the year. But anyway, I got my way and we went down. So that was the
Yeah.
first time I did New Zealand, was in 89. And I think we did okay there, but because it was our first year there, it was quite expensive because we had to, it was all sort of on us financially, and at least we had somewhere to stay and train down there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was the first year.
So in 1990, then, well, of course, you've got that one year under your belt, and you've got you're here, and gosh, you're on the podium. It's a big day for your family. Of course, there's a pretty famous race involving Ken and the
Oh
men's
yeah, that
side
other
there.
guy from Finland.
Yes, yeah, and that remarkable finish. But you're on the podium too, and just tell us about your day, because you came out of the water along with Aaron Baker, who Aaron was a good swimmer from a swimming background as well, so
She'd
a
always
good
make sure
scrap in
she
the
could
water.
find my feet. Look, honestly, if Aaron was in the race, as far as I was concerned, I was racing for second place. Like as far as biking goes, I just didn't have anything to come back with, if she was in the race. And even her running was far superior too. So it's kind of like, okay, Aaron's here. We're all racing for second for the, minor places.
Yeah. How
If
did you
she
like
was
that
out of
Auckland
race, she
course?
didn't get, what's that?
How
Sorry?
did you like that Auckland course? That was a tough old
Oh,
course,
I
the original
loved the
course.
Auckland course. It was, it was not like all the races now where they've got to be flat. It's got to be a fast,
Mm.
flat course. It was a challenging course. The bike ride,
Yeah.
it changed quite a number of times too. But I loved the run because it was hilly as well. It was challenging.
Yeah. Because that run, that run, it was tough because you were just straight up into the hills off the waterfront and running
Exactly.
out and straight up through St Heliers, and you're straight into it, weren't you? It was a
Yeah.
tough course.
And from memory, I think we did the hills twice.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we
sounds right.
did the hills, went back along the waterfront, and then did the hills again and back along the waterfront. So yeah, it was a good course. I loved it. I think it's a much better course than Taupo is. Taupo to me is just it's not a fun bike ride. I think the run's not too bad because there's a few more hills now on it than there was in the early days. So yes, it's a shame it moved out of Auckland, but I get it. There's just so much going on in Auckland that it kind of didn't take pride of place. Whereas you go to a smaller town like Taupo and they just love it, absolutely embrace it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like
Yeah.
the race in Canada in Penticton. That's what Taupo reminded me of. Is just the whole town wants to know your life story when you walk in to buy, something at a shop. They just love it.
Yeah, you finished second behind Aaron in 1990 at 9:53, but that was a really good year for you because Ironman Europe, you had a colossal win there that year with victory there and I think a 9:21 or something like that. Was that your fastest ever Ironman?
No, I did go back and do it the next year. And there was always a little bit of a question mark over Germany, whether it was a legitimate course.
Yeah.
But the next year I went back and there was a lady, Taya Simbisma. She was from Holland, I think. She did Kona a couple of times and did quite well, but she was the first one to break 9 hours, and that's
Oh
where she
wow.
did it.
Yeah.
So I think I was like a 9:10 or a 9:12 and came second.
Gosh. Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, I just, you know, the race in Germany was one of those races where just everything fell into place for me. I really did spend the day looking over my shoulder, wondering when somebody was going to come past me, because I'm pretty sure I led from start to finish.
Yeah.
And the further I went, just the more confident I got. So it was a really good day. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it flowed on into 1991. You come back to Ironman New Zealand, and well, this time round you get the job done. You're 10 minutes quicker than the previous year. You get the victory, and there's sort of a suggestion, I guess, that you maybe at that time in your mind you were thinking that, I haven't maybe got that much longer left in this sport. Was that the sort of line of thinking at that time?
I I don't think maybe not 91, but sort of getting into 92, I think was, it. That year, and the year before, I think it was the first couple of years and the only couple of years of the Ironman series. So we
Yeah.
did 5 Ironman races, and, the last one was Kona. And that was a lot
Yeah.
of Ironman racing to do. So I think 91 I did New Zealand, and then a month later I did Australia and won both of those. And that was
Mm.
probably my biggest, I don't know, just that's the thing that I'm probably most proud of in my career
Mm.
is being able to back those 2 races. If anybody said to me now, oh, I think I might do 2 Ironman races in a month, I'd be like, don't do that. You can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
between those two races, Jan, because you had a heck of a time through those 2 races to win them both and back to back within a month is incredible. What was it like what did you do between those 2 races? I mean, what's your sort of strategy to
Well, we
get down
figured
from
that we
one?
were hoping that our fitness from everything that we'd done in New Zealand would carry us through into the Australian race, because Ken did it as well. And so we basically had a good 10 days off of not doing a whole lot after New Zealand, then got back into doing a little bit more training and then tapered again. So it was just really testing the waters to see if we could do it. So I think we recovered pretty well. I think Ken was pretty recovered too. But it was certainly, interesting to try.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, what are your recollections of your first win in Auckland then? What can you recall of that day?
Just being so super excited coming across the finishing line, and also having Ken there as well. So, it was a really special day. Um, and, it was always nice to race in the same races with him. Once we had our daughter Rhiannon, it became a little bit more difficult. We did do New Zealand 1 year together and vowed we would never do the same Ironman race ever again, because the preparation leading into it was just really hard, to try to get a balance between taking care of her, not leaving her with my family too much. So yeah, we learned our lesson.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
On that day, Jan, because you didn't just win that. I mean, looking at the results here, you won that by 12 minutes. I mean, it's an incredible margin. But you ran a 3:02 that day. I mean, that was a tough course, like we were saying earlier. That's a heck of a time on that course. It really is.
Yeah, again, that's one of my runs that I was just so proud of. And I think it just, you just sort of feed off it. Like, I knew nobody was really close to me, so I could just really relax and not worry about anything. And I think, racing off the front, I don't think I've ever done that again, in terms of being so comfortable. But, knowing that I was running the pace that I was running, I was confident that, I was going to get there first.
Yeah.
I can remember they used to have a car that had speakers on top of it, and it was almost like the leader car. And I can remember the woman sort of driving up beside me. Oh, what music would you like to listen to? While I was running. So, and it was on the last section back into the finish line. So it was really good. It was a really good feeling.
Yeah, yeah. So it was a long time before we kind of saw you back at Ironman New Zealand after that victory
Um,
on the start line as such.
yeah, well, I
Yeah,
think,
yeah,
no, I had my daughter in 93.
yeah.
And I wasn't going to race again. As
That was
far as
what I
I
was
was
going to ask.
concerned,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I was done. I think my memories of Kona in 91 weren't great. So, but because I kept being dragged to the races with Ken, I'm like, there's still the same people around. They're not really not going any faster than we did when I was racing. I think I need to start doing some races again. So, and I think my first main race back was New Zealand, and I'm not very good. Like I said, I'm just not very good with years. Late,
96.
96. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And probably my fondest memory of that was having my daughter come across the finishing line with me.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I've seen a lovely photo of that, and so that would have been magnificent. So but was it literally a flicking of the switch, saying, you were going to these races with Ken, and it was like, wow, nothing's changed a great deal. I think it's easier said than done, of course, because you've gone through becoming a mum and all those things. How hard was it to get yourself into that shape, or was it hard to get yourself back into race shape?
well, I still did a lot of running. You do what you can with the time that you have to do things. So I think I'd done a couple of marathons in the interim, and my swimming sort of never fell off too far. So it was just a matter of getting back on the bike again. But I always think that when you have somebody else that's so important to you as far as children go, it gives you a better balance in life. Your perspective is so different when it's just you racing. It doesn't really matter how you do, they still love you at the end of the day. So I just don't think I felt the same amount of pressure racing after having her as I did before I had her. It was just much more comfortable training and racing. Right.
Yeah.
It must be a nice phase to be in, Jan, when the pressure's off you and you can just race because you're enjoying it and you want to do it, and you've got new motivation in your life with your daughter and just the phase of life that you're in at that point.
Yeah. I mean, the last time I did Hawaii, I vowed I'd never do it again, which I never did. And I did qualify for it quite a few times, but I had no desire to do that. So my drive after that was to go to races that I had never been to before, do something different. And then, because I said Ken and I, just decided we weren't going to do the same races again ever as far as the Ironman went, it worked well. He was a perennial at Kona. I couldn't care less.
Yeah, just a quiet 36 in a row. Yeah.
Quiet, yes.
Yeah.
So,
Jen, it's funny. You just sort of saying about sort of mentally, the pressure being just being different after you've become a mum and not so stressed by things. And I guess that race in '96 that was a bit of a good old scrap. So that day I think Megan Evans sort of flogged everyone in the water, and then Jenny Rose was on her debut, and she was very, very strong on the bike. So
yeah,
you had a good scrap that day, a really good race to sort of
yeah.
to finally get the job done on the marathon.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing I did have when I was racing is a lot of confidence in my run. When I was racing pro, I didn't have a bad run. I think part of that was because I raced solidly on the bike, but I didn't race hard on the bike. I always had that bit in reserve. And I think that people who don't have confidence in their run ride hard to try to make up for what they don't have when they run, and they just fall to pieces. So, it's just good to get off the bike and know that you've got run legs.
And it must be, for the people you were competing against, they would be listening for the footsteps coming because they know you're going to unleash a pretty handy run at the end of this.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, like I can remember doing Australia, I think it was the 35th anniversary, and I run down one of the girls at in California, and I can't remember her name now, but she said, somebody told me to watch out for you, running at the end of the race because you like running people down. So yes, I think I kind of had that reputation, but it depended on the field.
Yes.
Coming back as a mum, and we're winding the clock back a little bit now. There was a time we've just had the 50th anniversary of the Christchurch Commonwealth Games. It's just been celebrated.
Wow.
Back at those Com Games, the women didn't run over 1,500 metres. Marathon was reasonably new at Olympic level. Say, in '96 when you were winning in
I watched
in
the
Auckland.
first marathon. I watched the first marathon in '84 when Joan Benoit won it. She's one of my all-time heroes. She was just brilliant that day. But it's hard to believe 1984 was the first marathon ever at the Olympic Games. So yeah,
it's crazy, isn't it?
But it really is.
Yeah, but on top of that, so 12 years on from that, you're winning as a mum at Ironman. Was at the time, was there much sort of made of that as a role model for other mums getting back into sport and the like? Was that seen as a big thing?
Probably not as much as it is nowadays. I mean, it was just ho hum kind of thing. I don't think it was thought of as being anything exceptional back then. But they certainly make a big fuss about it now. This person's a mum, or you look at what happened with the Australian Open. Everybody was talking about all the new mums in the sport. Erin and I were kind of unique in that regard. We still raced after we had children, but it's pretty commonplace nowadays. But they still seem to make more of a fuss about it now than back then. But you just do what you do.
Well, what was it like coming back the next year as a defending champion?
Yeah, I think I might have struggled a little bit that year. I don't know. How did I do?
Well, you won.
You won.
Oh, did I? Okay.
You won. You
might have struggled early on, but you did pretty well at the end.
I don't remember a whole lot about it. Again, I think I probably came across the line with Rhiannon, which one thing I do remember, and I don't know whether this was 97 or 98, was Rhiannon ended up doing a little bit of gymnastics, and she asked me if I'd do a cartwheel to show her how to do a cartwheel. And this was before the race. And I said, I might just wait until after the race. Do you know, the minute I came across that finish line, she's like, Mum, can you show me how to do a cartwheel now?
She'd been banking that up all that time.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's those sorts of things that you remember. Like, I don't remember too much about those last two races, except for having her there and having my family there. So I do remember, I think it was 97. I was just going back into the hills and Ken was coming out of the hills running. And honestly, the look on his face when he realised I was, in the prime position, he just couldn't believe it. He yelled at me so loud.
Well, that race, you did a 3:09 marathon, and according to looking at my notes, you did better than everyone except the top 6 men. So you really, really ripped the course up that day.
Enjoy my running.
Yeah, clearly.
I just looking at the notes, there was a good podium that day too. There was yourself at the top, Lauren Alexander in second, and Fiona McKee. I mean, that's a very, very good podium, and yeah, you definitely ran Lauren down. I mean, Lauren is a very good cyclist in her day, and you ran her down and had a great race.
Yeah, like I said, I don't remember that much about it. Sort of another lifetime now.
Yeah. Well, you kept on sort of rocking back, and that was I guess your last win of your 3 magnificent wins in New Zealand. 98, you were back and finished 4th, just off the podium, but again a good result. And 99,
I do remember that day was horrible. It was so windy. It was one of the worst days on the bike. It was just brutal. I remember that much.
Do you remember 99? You finished 5th, and of course that was the year that Ironman New Zealand shifted to Taupo, and it rained.
Yes, I can remember that.
What are sort of the overbiting sort of memories of that day?
Just how horrible that hill is coming back into town. That 10K uphill on that stone chip road. Yes.
Heartbreak Hill. The locals call it Heartbreak Hill.
Yeah,
it is
well known.
Horrible, absolutely horrible.
Yeah. There's a few lost souls drifting around on that hill at the end of a race.
Yeah. Again, another one of those days when you just look at it and think, why am I doing this?
Yeah. Well, how long did you continue racing as a pro?
I think I finished maybe sort of 99, 2000. I just felt like I started working a bit more and wasn't training as much, and tended to sort of be, with Rhiannon a bit more. And so, I just didn't have all that much time to train. And I always said I'd retire once I felt like I wasn't competitive anymore. Not retire, I'd race age group. So I raced age group from then. I mean, the last race I did was Rolt in 2018. So that was the last Ironman I did. And, all those years. And you always get people say to you, oh, you shouldn't be racing age group. You're a professional. I'm like, I don't live the life of a professional anymore. And I'm not young like I used to be. So you've got to have somewhere to go if you still enjoy the sport. Right?
Of course.
And I think that's the thing. I just really enjoyed the sport.
Yeah. And you still want to compete, Jan. I mean, looking at the notes here, I mean, it's had you down here at Ironman New Zealand racing age group in 2014. It's only 10 years ago and won your age group, and obviously had a good day. I mean, you're still quick, man. Still under 11 hours in 2014. I mean, that's incredibly good.
Yeah, and that was a competitive year. I remember that one. There were a couple of ladies from the US who were right on my butt, and they were.
Yeah, well, that was the 30th. That was the 30th anniversary.
30th anniversary, yeah.
Yeah.
So I do remember that day, and it was a tough day. It really was. But, yes, I enjoyed that day.
Tell us about your sporting interests now. These days, do you still swim? Do you still run? I'm guessing you might have sort of hidden the bike somewhere in the back of the garage.
Biking and running. I don't do a lot of it. I spend quite a bit of time driving to and from work. I think the thing that I enjoy most of anything now is I do quite a bit of coaching, and I sort of have specialized in coaching females, and mainly, older females going through, perimenopause and menopause. And, have done quite a bit of research and work in those areas because everybody's just totally lost it. And it's the same with younger girls who still have their cycle, trying to advise them on how best to navigate that with all the beautiful apps that are around. I think one of the biggest problems with all of the research that we have in diet, nutrition, wearables, it's all based on male algorithms and male research. So it's getting better, but just making sure that women understand that there are things that they need to do differently that will definitely help them move forward faster and recover better. And, I think we lose a lot of young girls from our sport because they go through puberty, and there's so many coaches out there who do not know how to handle it. You don't flog them harder because they're getting slower. You get them into doing some more functional things. So.
I remember reading a quote from the author who may or may not be familiar with, who writes a lot about these sort of things, Dr. Stacey Sims. And
yes, I'm very familiar with her. I've done a lot of her courses.
Yeah, good. And Stacey's awesome. But I remember reading something, and she wrote that people need to realize that women in endurance sport, women aren't small men.
No,
and that's
in any aspect of life, but that's how we're treated. When you take the research that's done on males, they say, "Oh, we just need to adapt a little bit because women are just smaller."
Yeah.
So yeah, I've done quite a lot of her courses, and there are things that from personal experience I don't agree with. The training methods that she puts forward. But, I'm just one individual. I don't think her training regimen would have worked for me. But I just think there are things across the board that females can do to really help them just do better at what they're doing. And, they don't have to be going hard, and they don't have to be going long. And, they need to be doing strength work, which is really important. But yeah, that's kind of my passion these days. And it's not just in the world of triathlon either. It's just anything. With the job that I have, I try to educate people on, why they're feeling the way they are. The biggest thing that I hear is women talking about how they put on weight and they don't know what to do about it. And just heading them in the right direction and giving them a little bit of education about who they can see and just some basic things that they can do. That's sort of where my interests are at the moment.
So where are you working, Jan? Where are you working now?
I work at a chiropractic clinic in Brisbane. I do remedial massage, and I do biomechanics and analysis, and I do some rehab as well, and do some consultation on, how to best navigate menopause, perimenopause. So.
Jen, it might be an unusual question, but and you're not an egotistical person, so I probably know the answer here. But some of these athletes that you're working with, whether they're younger, older, in between, doesn't really matter. I mean, I always look at it as an athlete, as someone that's keen to get out there and get into it as an athlete in my mind. But do they understand who you are in the world of Ironman and the numerous wins you've had and the trailblazing you did in the day? Do they understand? Or do they know?
No. And I mean, it's not something that you go advertising either.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jan. I've done Ironman 3 times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I've certainly, like a few of the ladies, the older ladies that I coach, they sort of know my background, but they still often say to me, "Oh, I didn't know you did such and such." But, you just don't need to advertise those things. It just, your knowledge should speak volumes as to what you know and, how you're navigating things. So.
Do you follow the sport of Ironman still? Do you are you aware of who's hot, who's not?
I kind of have an idea of, who's doing what. I, definitely think the whole, the sport of triathlon, Ironman in particular, I think I'm going to sound really old when I say this, it's not what it used to be, and I wouldn't expect it to be what it used to be, but I still think that the athletes are probably the ones that suffer the most for what goes on in the sport. And I honestly think, and this has nothing to do with Ironman, but I honestly think the worst thing that ever happened to triathlon was it becoming an Olympic sport, because there's just too many people that hang on the coattails of the sport and officialdom, and want to be in 5-star hotels and do all the good things that officials do, and it's at the expense of the athletes. So the athletes just get a raw deal. And I think it's the same with Ironman. I don't ever think that Ironman, and I'm not talking about Ironman New Zealand, because I think they're just a whole different breed. They really are. But I think that WTC has not, and I don't think it's called WTC anymore.
Yeah,
Is it?
it's World Triathlon. Yeah.
I just don't think they've ever really had the interests of the athletes at the, as the most important thing. It's, they really haven't taken, the years when all these pros had to do 5 or 6 qualifying races to earn points. I mean, that was just so brutal. They really didn't have a world championship by the time Kona came around, because they were all just exhausted from having to try to qualify. That to me was just so counterproductive. So, a few things they've done along the way I don't really agree with, but my opinion.
Yeah, when you look at now with we've got Super League Triathlon, we've got PTO, obviously got the Olympic sort of scenarios and that circuit, and then Ironman, and so if you is that a sort of a, I don't know, a turboed up version of what you were doing in reality in the early days, with racing all distances and all those things?
Yeah, I guess. Well, I think because it was about trying to earn a living, you because there were limited races around that had prize money in it, you had to really be just, you had to do whatever you could do to earn a living. And that meant you had to be competitive over any distance and race at any distance. And, now there's so many more races. But I do think it's great for the sport to have some other organisations that are providing a better living for athletes. Competition is great. You guys in New Zealand must, that the less competition there is, the more expensive things become. And it's the same in Australia. You go to somewhere like the US, there's competition everywhere. Like, there's multiple banks that you can go to. But if there isn't competition amongst the organisations, then, you're lumbered with whatever the main one doles out. So competition's great. It really is.
Yeah.
It can only help improve the conditions for athletes.
Jan, just to wrap things up, I guess you said at the outset, I guess you look back really fondly on the early days and the opportunity to do the things you do, and so you look back on it. Do you pinch yourself a wee bit? So, wow, what a lifestyle! The opportunities that I've had to lead this life.
Yes, I really do think that. But the sad part is I didn't appreciate it at the time. You kind of live on the memories that you made and the things that you did, the people that you met, the places that you went to. There just wouldn't have been an opportunity had I stayed and taught in Australia all my life. I wouldn't change anything that I did over those years. It was just such a great existence. It was hard work. And if we sat down and figured out our hourly pay for how much we trained during the week, we'd be on the poverty line.
Yeah.
But it just provided such a great lifestyle for us. It really did. And I enjoyed every minute of it. I loved it.
Well, you said you didn't appreciate it at the time. We really appreciate you giving your time to us, and we really appreciate everything that you have done in the sport, your loyalty to Ironman New Zealand over the years, and we're very grateful that you have joined us tonight on the Old School Tri Show. Thank you very much, Jan Wanklyn.
Well, I hope that the 40th anniversary provides you with lots of great spectating. And you have lots of really good athletes there. Enjoy the day. Thank you.